Today, at my own son's wedding, I, Edward Blake, 70 years old, was handed a silver card that read cold and clear, "Limited access, guest ceremony only." The receptionist whispered, "I'm sorry, sir. The main reception isn't included with this pass." I stood there frozen in the middle of that grand ballroom, watching guests being guided into the VIP area, while I was left outside the dining hall. Before I tell you what happened next, hit subscribe and tell me, where are you listening from? I used to be an architect, the kind who built towers that carried other people's names. But now, in my own son's grand wedding, I didn't even have a seat. I stood there, surrounded by white flowers and the soft sound of violins. Music so beautiful it almost mocked my awkwardness. They say a wedding is the happiest day for parents, but for me, it felt like someone had placed a stone right on my chest. The perfume, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it blended into something distant, cold. This morning, before leaving home, I'd carefully pressed my old gray suit, worn but still neat. I didn't want to show up looking tired or out of place. After all, I was once the head of a major architecture firm honored in San Francisco. I'd made millions just to give my son Nathan Blake a smoother start than I ever had. I thought today, as he stepped into a new life, I'd sit in the front row smiling with pride. Turns out, I was wrong. When the receptionist handed me that silver card, I thought it was a mistake. Must be a printing error, I told myself, trying to stay calm. But when I looked around, every other guest, Nathan's friends, Alyssa's colleagues, wore gold badges, each engraved with full access guest. The warm lights reflected off those cards, shimmering like quiet mockery. I leaned in and asked softly, "What about the dinner after the ceremony?" She lowered her eyes, replying gently, "I'm sorry, Mr. Blake. Your pass only allows entry to the ceremony. The dinner's at full capacity." Full capacity. Those two words hit like a verdict. All my life I'd designed buildings where every inch was measured, every space accounted for. Yet I never imagined I'd be the one left without a place in my own son's life. I looked toward Nathan, hoping for a glance. But he was busy smiling at Alyssa on the stage. That smile, once my greatest wish to see, now cut deeper than I expected. That's when it sank in. This wasn't a mistake. Alyssa, the bride, she's a perfectionist. I saw it from the first day we met. Polite, distant, always speaking in that corporate tone, like a negotiation. She'd said the wedding would be private and elegant, only for those who matter. I didn't think much of it back then. But now, staring at that silver card, I finally understood who mattered and who didn't. The MC's voice echoed, inviting guests to the main hall. I stayed by the side entrance where a few servers cleared empty glasses. Through the glass wall, I saw them walking hand in hand down the flower aisle, bathed in golden light as the guests applauded. No one noticed the father of the groom, standing outside. No one. A familiar voice called out my old friend Lawrence. He hesitated. "Eddie, everything okay?" I smiled. "No, I just don't seem to fit in the VIP crowd today." He looked at the card in my hand and said nothing. His eyes said enough. I left before the ceremony began. Outside, the sea wind blew hard, salty against my face. I sat on a wooden bench near the hotel garden and pulled out my phone. A notification flashed. Transfer completed, $150,000 to wedding fund Nathan and Alyssa. I stared at that number for a long time. 6 figures scraped from my retirement savings meant to help them buy their first home. I remembered Nathan's words when he asked for it. "Dad, I'll pay you back after I sell my shares. I just need it before the wedding." I'd nodded right away. I believed in family and trust, in the kind of bond you don't need a contract for. But now, I understood. Some debts are never paid in money, only in respect, and that I've already lost. The wind brushed past. I held up the silver card light, glinting off the words, "ceremony only." Those 2 words lodged in my throat. I let out a dry laugh, brittle, awkward, the sound of something breaking quietly inside. People walking by gave me odd looks. Maybe they thought I was just some confused old man. But no, I'd never been more clear-headed in my life. I stood, straightened my tie, and turned back toward the ballroom. A decision formed sharp and cold as steel. If they only wanted me for the ceremony, then they won't have me for the gift. I walked to the gift table lined with elegant boxes. In the corner sat my wooden one. It stood out among the white envelopes. A few staff members glanced curiously as I opened it, quietly pulled out the $150,000 check and the handwritten blessing note. I closed the box, locked it, and slipped the check into my jacket pocket. As I walked away, I spoke just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Maybe. They don't need this gift anymore." And then I left. Behind me, the music played on bright and hollow. Golden lights shimmered through the glass. For the first time in my life, I felt completely sober and utterly alone. I drove out of the resort in silence. The headlights swept across the palm trees, the silver shimmer of the sea in the distance flickering, almost mocking. I didn't turn on the radio, just let the wind whistle through the cracked window, and the sound of my own heartbeat fill the quiet. I don't think the road home has ever felt this long. It was as if I'd just buried something, not trust, but the very image of the father I once believed I was. I stopped at a gas station, bought a cup of black coffee, and sat there in the car, staring at the empty boulevard ahead. In my mind, the scene kept replaying, that young receptionist handing me the silver card. It all happened in seconds, yet it tore through 70 years of pride I had built. I thought I was used to loneliness after the divorce, used to the silence that comes when your children grow up, but nothing prepares you for being pushed aside by the very person you raised. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid the check on the table beside a half-empty glass of bourbon. I turned it over and over, the $150,000 gleaming like a sharp edge. I once thought it was a symbol of love, a quiet way to support my son's new beginning. Now, it was nothing but proof of my blindness. I remembered when Nathan was little how he loved building models, tagging along to construction sites, asking 1,000 innocent questions. I believed he'd follow in my steps, not by career, but by honesty and respect. The next morning my phone buzzed. Nathan appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. His voice was tight, uneasy. "Dad, why did you leave early last night? Everyone was asking about you." I spoke slowly. I thought there wasn't a seat for me at the dinner. Silence. Then I heard Alyssa's voice faint in the background. "Tell him." Nathan exhaled, his tone dropping lower. "It was just a mix-up in the arrangements, Dad. No one meant anything by it." I smiled. He couldn't see it, but I did. I recognized that tone. The one people use when they're afraid to take responsibility. I said, "If it was just a mix-up, good. I'll stop by to talk." That afternoon I drove to their house, a brand new villa glass roof, lavender garden. Elegant, precise, lifeless. Not a single corner felt like home. Alyssa opened the door, polite smile eyes avoiding mine. Nathan waited in the living room, and beside him, Margaret, my ex-wife, of course. They'd called her in to soften me up. "Dad, I'm sorry if last night made you uncomfortable," Nathan said, trying to sound sincere. I placed the check envelope on the glossy wooden table. "It's fine," I said evenly. "I just came to return this." Alyssa frowned. "There's no need, Mr. Blake. Your gift was very much appreciated." I looked at her, young, sharp, distant, her eyes cold as a contract. "Appreciated enough," I said, "to keep the giver out of the dinner." The room fell silent. Margaret spoke softly. "Edward, please. Don't make this a big deal. They just wanted to keep things organized." I turned to her. "I always thought organized meant less chaos, not less humanity." Nathan bit his lip eyes down. His hand tightened around Alyssa's. A small gesture, but it told me everything. He'd made his choice not for love, but for stability, for convenience. I poured a cup of tea, slid it toward him. "You know when you were little," I said quietly, "I kept every one of your first sketches. I believed one day you'd design your own life, but maybe you've just learned to trace someone else's. Nathan didn't answer. I didn't press him. I stood, picked up the check, and slipped it back into my pocket. "Keep your pride, son," I said. "I'll take back the money." As I walked out, Margaret called after me. "Edward, what are you doing? You'll lose your son." I didn't turn around. "I'm not losing him," I said softly. "I'm just giving back the role you all took from me yesterday." Outside, a light rain had started. I walked down the stone path, the chill seeping through my coat. Everything was suddenly clear. They didn't need me. They just needed what I brought. And now the only thing I still owned was silence. The one thing they could never buy. I got in the car, the wipers moving rhythmically. The rain blurred the windshield, but inside my mind, everything was brighter than ever. I knew their perfect little story would soon crack. People can hide their ambition beneath a white wedding dress, but not forever. So I'll wait. And when the truth finally shows itself, I won't be angry. I'll just watch them admit what they couldn't say today, that they lost a father, not because of his mistakes, but because of their pride. I didn't see Nathan for a whole week after that conversation. The house felt emptier than ever. Each morning I still brewed my coffee, still played that same old jazz record, still looked out at the garden behind the house. But there was a hollow space threading through every familiar sound. I wasn't angry, not really. Just a quiet ache, like I'd closed the door to a room where I once kept all the warmth of family. Then on Saturday morning, while I was polishing my old car in the garage, the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw Nathan standing outside with Alyssa. Behind them, Margaret. My ex-wife, arms folded, looking uneasy. I sighed and opened the door. The air outside felt colder than I expected. "Dad, we just want to talk," Nathan said softly, awkwardly. I nodded and stepped aside. I didn't offer tea. I knew this wasn't a social visit. Alyssa set a small bag on the table, her smile polite but strained. "We're sorry about that misunderstanding," she said. "There were so many guests. Things got out of hand." I met her eyes, calm but clear. "A misunderstanding can be fixed," I said. "But deciding who belongs at the table? That's not a mistake." Margaret cut in, trying to ease the tension. "Eddie, don't be so stubborn. Nathan didn't mean to disrespect you. He was busy. Alyssa handled most of the planning." I looked at them for a moment, then spoke slowly. "I've lived long enough to tell the difference between being busy and being complicit in silence." The room went still. Only the ticking of the old pendulum clock filled the space. Nathan took a breath, his voice shaking a little. "Dad, I don't want to argue. We came here to give the money back." He placed an envelope on the table. I recognized the bank seal immediately. I sat quietly for a few seconds, then let out a soft laugh. "You think this is about money?" "No, but I don't want you to think we took your money and ignored you." "Nathan," I said, cutting him off, "what disappoints me isn't that you took the money. It's that you sold my dignity just to keep your wife's image clean." Alyssa frowned slightly, gripping Nathan's hand. "Mr. Blake, we never meant to offend you. But with big events, there are difficult choices. You were a businessman, I'm sure you understand that." I looked at her, young, successful, confident, and for the first time I saw the emptiness in the eyes of someone who'd already won. "You're right," I said quietly. "I've made plenty of hard choices in my life, but never once did I choose to cut out the person who gave me life just to look better in front of others." Margaret spoke gently. "Eddie, let it go. The past is past. They just want to live their own way." I turned to her. "I'm not holding on to the past, Margaret," I said, voice low. "I just regret that our son has forgotten how to face it." The words landed heavy. No one spoke. Nathan looked down. Alyssa sighed. I walked to the window, staring out at the damp garden still glistening from last night's rain. The light came through the trees, soft and hazy, like fading memories. Without turning around, I said, "You know, when I was younger, I thought success meant building houses. But now I know real worth comes from keeping a home inside someone's heart." "Dad," Nathan whispered, his voice breaking. I turned to face him, a grown man, sharp suit, confident posture, yet lost. "I'm not angry with you, son," I said quietly. "I just don't want to sit at a table where I was never meant to belong." I picked up the envelope and handed it back to him. "Use it however you want," I said. "But remember, some things once lost can never be bought back." Alyssa said nothing. She just took Nathan's hand and headed for the door. Before leaving, Nathan looked at me and murmured, "Dad, maybe I just need time." "I've given you a lifetime, Nathan," I replied. "The time that's left, I'm keeping for myself." When the door closed, I stood there alone, and a strange sense of calm filled the room. No anger, just stillness. I walked over to the table and looked at an old photo, the two of us on his first visit to a construction site. He was grinning wide, holding my hand tight. Now that same hand had let go, not because I failed to hold it, but because it chose something else. I sighed, gently brushed the dust off the frame, and set it back down. Outside, the sunlight broke through. A part of me wanted to believe that someday Nathan would understand that some mistakes don't need punishment, because memory itself is the sentence. I took a sip of cold tea, glanced at the silent phone on the table. I didn't know if he'd call again, but inside me, the storm had passed. All that remained was peace, the kind I thought I'd lost a long, long time ago. 3 days after that visit, I thought everything was over. My house had slipped back into its quiet rhythm, the ticking of the old pendulum clock, the scent of oak, the morning light spilling through the window. I took walks around the neighborhood, tried not to think about Nathan, and just when I started to believe I could forget, an unfamiliar envelope arrived. No return address, just 2 handwritten words, "Lawrence, my old friend," and one of the sponsors of the wedding. I opened it. His handwriting was still bold and free, but the words made my chest tighten. "Eddie, I don't mean to meddle in your family's business, but there's something you should know." 3 days before the wedding, the guest list was changed. The signature wasn't from the event planners. It was Nathan's. I sat up straight. My heart clenched hard. Lawrence continued. He told the staff, "Move my father to the outer area. We don't want any overlap with Alyssa's mother." I thought it was a misunderstanding at first, but when I saw you leave early that night, I knew it wasn't. I put the letter down. My hands trembled, not with anger, but disappointment. Every apology, every bowed head, every word about misunderstanding, all of it had been staged. They'd planned it, calculated it. I had been nothing more than a piece of decor in their perfect ceremony, and when I no longer fit the image, they simply removed me. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in silence. The burn in my throat mixed with the bitterness in my chest. I remembered a night long ago, when Nathan was just a boy. He had asked me, "Dad, when I get married, you'll sit in the front row." Right, I laughed, ruffled his hair. "Of course, son. I'll be the first one standing when you walk out." That memory echoed now like a cruel joke. I opened the drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were a few things I'd kept over the years. Nathan's first drawing, a photo of him holding his student architecture award, and a crumpled note written in a child's scrawl. "Dad, you're my hero." I stared at those uneven letters, memories flooding back in sharp waves, and in that moment the anger faded, replaced by something softer, a quiet sorrow for a son who had forgotten he once had a father worth admiring. Outside, the rain began to fall. I got up, opened the window. Raindrops hit the roof in slow rhythm, mingling with my breath. I folded Lawrence's letter, neatly tucked it into a drawer. I didn't need proof anymore. Sometimes truth doesn't need to be told. It only needs a moment of clarity to be seen. That evening, a message appeared on my phone. "Dad, I hope you're okay. Everything will pass." I looked at it and let out a quiet laugh. Yes, everything passes, but not in the way he thinks. I typed a few words, then deleted them. There was nothing left to say. Between us now wasn't the distance of 2 generations. It was the canyon of broken trust. I sat by the table watching the small candle burn low, and I realized I wasn't truly cut off from my family at the wedding. It happened earlier, the moment Nathan chose silence when they moved my name to the secondary list. Maybe to him it was just a small detail, but to me it was the line between love and disregard. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. "You didn't shame me, son. You just made me lose faith." Then I closed it, took a deep breath. The rain had stopped. A dim moon hid behind the clouds, casting faint light across the room. I leaned back, closed my eyes. Maybe when you've lost enough, the pain finally runs out. That night I slept deeply, the first dreamless sleep since the wedding. And in that dream I found myself standing in an unfinished building, sunlight warming my calloused hands. No one was there, and yet I felt lighter than ever. For the first time in years, I was free. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, painting the room a pale gold. It was so quiet. I could hear the clock hands ticking one by one. Strange feeling, no anger, no regret. Just a light emptiness like the calm after a storm, when everything settles in silence. I brewed a cup of black tea and sat on the porch watching the small garden glisten with dew. Today I knew there was one last thing I needed to do, the final chapter of this story. I opened the cabinet and took out the old check. $150,000, the edges slightly curled. I looked at the number, then placed it into the wooden box engraved with the words, "To Nathan and Alyssa. Love, Dad." I wiped off the dust and put back the letter of blessing I'd once written with all the faith of a father. "I wish you happiness, because true love is the only thing money can't buy." Back then I believed every word. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. I sat down and wrote a new letter, short, calm, without bitterness or blame. Just a real goodbye. Nathan, I don't know what made you think you had to remove your father from your wedding day, but I understand every decision has its reasons. I just want you to know, I forgive you. Not for your sake, but for mine. I've spent my whole life building homes for others, yet never had one of my own. Maybe it's time I find a place where I truly belong. I'm not taking back the money out of greed only to keep the last piece of dignity I lost that day. Live well, son, and when you have a boy of your own, I hope he never feels the way I once did. I signed it, folded it neatly, sealed the envelope. That afternoon I stopped by the bank and withdrew all my remaining savings. The clerk looked puzzled. "Sir, may I ask where you're transferring the funds?" I smiled. To somewhere quieter. 2 weeks later, I sold my house in California and moved to Colorado, a small village tucked between pine forests. I rented a little wooden cabin by the lake. Each morning, I brewed tea red and sketched the old architectural designs I'd left unfinished. In the afternoons, I fed the ducks, watched the sunset turn the water purple. I no longer thought about that silver guest card or the applause from that wedding night. Maybe peace doesn't come from being loved, but from knowing when to stop chasing it. One evening while cleaning the bookshelf, I found an old photo frame. It was of Nathan and me standing on the roof of our first building site together. He was smiling so proudly. I touched the glass and whispered, "I kept my word, son." I stood in the front row, not at your wedding, but among those who once truly loved you. I placed the photo on the table beside a small candle. Then I took out the old check and lit a match. The paper-curled flames flickering softly, reflecting off my face. Not angry, not sad. I watched the ashes drift upward and murmured, "They didn't cut me out of the wedding. They cut themselves out of my life." In that moment, a strange lightness filled my chest, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted. The next morning, Lawrence called. His voice was low. "Eddie, I heard you sold your house. Are you all right?" I answered quietly. Better than ever, I finally understand. Not everyone bound by blood is family. Real family is where there's respect, even between strangers. After hanging up, I looked out the window. The first snow had begun to fall, tiny flakes glittering under the pale sunlight. I poured another cup of tea, sat at the old wooden table, and opened my worn notebook. The final line I wrote was light as breath. No party lasts forever, and no pain does either. When one door closes, sometimes it's not a loss, it's the beginning of freedom. I smiled softly, watching the snow drift outside the porch. My heart felt still, like the calm surface of the lake. After everything I had learned, the simplest truth of all, some wounds don't need to be healed. They just need to be let go. If you've listened this far, maybe you too have felt the pain of being hurt by someone you love. But sometimes, loss isn't the end. It's the beginning of finding yourself again. If this story made you think, hit subscribe. There are many more true stories like this, ones that will speak straight to your heart. And don't forget to like and share so more people will remember this simple truth. Family only means something when there's still respect.